Hola, bienvenidos a Observatorio Cotidiano. Soy Fernando Castañeda y hoy vamos a tener un programa realmente excepcional. Tenemos el gusto de que esté con nosotros Lucia Reisch. Ella es investigadora en Dinamarca, pero ha sido profesora y trabaja en varias universidades, tanto en Estados Unidos como en la propia Alemania. Nació en Alemania. Me estaba contando que en Leipzig es asesora de Angela Merkel y además, que es de lo que vamos a platicar, ella es parte de toda una nueva corriente en la economía, o que se ha vuelto por lo menos, no sé qué tan nueva, ya le voy a preguntar, pero por lo menos se ha vuelto muy importante en los últimos años en la teoría económica y en la política pública, precisamente por el desplazamiento que ha habido de las viejas teorías racionales y del actor racional a teorías en donde empieza a contar más toda una serie de condicionantes sobre las cuales se toman decisiones en situaciones de riesgo. Situaciones que básicamente pueden ser vistas como problemas conductuales, como problemas psicológicos, que de alguna manera definen mucho de las decisiones. Dicho de otra manera, en situaciones de riesgo, contingencia o incertidumbre, la gente tiene patrones de comportamiento que quizá no son explicables en términos de la política de una teoría racional del actor, pero que sí son susceptibles de ser explicadas por otro tipo de teorías, como precisamente estas teorías, este nuevo behaviorismo económico, que es precisamente en lo que Lucia es sin duda una líder. Y para empezar, voy a empezar preguntándole, Lucia, thank you for being here, and I want to know, well, what about notch? What is notch? Can you tell us about this phenomena of nudge?
Yes,
Please.
I'm happy to do that. So a nudge is a little stimuli, which is very gentle, which is never forceful, that moves people into a specific direction. And the interesting thing is that you move them into a direction that they actually want to go. So it is for their own health, for their own welfare. That's why the authors of Nudge, which is Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein, say, it is as judged by themselves. So it's not about introducing new artificial aims, but it's about helping the people to reach those aims. So it's like as judged by themselves. It's a very important criteria. And they can come in completely different forms. So nudges are little tools such as defaults, little frames, little reminders. It can be pre-commitments or self-commitments, and they would call that nudges, so self-nudges. They come in different forms, and it really depends on the type of application and what you want to reach, which tools to use.
Well, for example, you have an example of this kind of nudge?
Yes, absolutely. So for instance, let's start with a self-nudge. If I want to do more physical exercise, if I want to lose weight, I might set myself a goal, and those little nudges help me to reach that goal. That could be, for instance, a little app that sends you reminders that you're only walked about 1,000 steps today, but you're supposed to run 3,000. So kind of little feedback instruments that can help. It can also be something that reminds you of what the social norms are. So norms can also can be used as a tool. So people, since we are social animals, we tend to do what we think other people want us to do because we want to be like others. So communicating social norms makes people adhere to those social norms. And that could be social norms of, how active you should be, or which type of transportation you should use, or how much you're supposed to save. So social norms can also be very, very helpful little nudges. Hotels use that a lot. Maybe you have already seen in a hotel where they say 9 out of 10 guests reuse their towels to help the environment. That would be what we would call a descriptive social norm and a little nudge. There's tons of other examples.
And you decide if you want if you keep your towel, or if you gave
exactly.
it to...
So the core thing
you
is
have a choice.
Exactly. So the nudges are little tools, and that discriminates them from just simple information or education on the one hand, but also from laws or hard regulation, taxes, fines, punishments. They are always voluntarily, which means you are kind of pushed in a specific direction, but you can always opt out. So they're always there, you can act according to that nudge, but you can also do something else. And this is why the theoretical base or the concept is called libertarian paternalism.
Yes, that's my second question.
Yes.
What do you mean by libertarian paternalism?
Yes. So libertarian paternalism it sounds a little bit like an oxymoron, but it's actually not. I mean, whenever you do politics, and you decide which type of policies you use, whether it's taxes or bans or subsidies or education or nudges, there is always a paternalistic act, because you want people to save more for the environment, to be better citizens, to go and vote, to lose weight. These are the aims. So these are always some paternalistic acts, but libertarian, because as opposed to this hard type of regulation, there's always a way to opt out and to do something completely different, and that does not have a consequence. You're not punished for it. Maybe you work against the social norms, and then there might be like some social punishment, but the state, we're talking about regulatory nudges, not what a company does or what a parent does with his kids. Regulatory nudges do not have consequences in the sense of that something negative happens to you. But they're still stronger than just when you just provide information or education. They're good, information is good, but it doesn't really do the trick. It doesn't really change behavior.
Let me ask you, do you believe that they are more efficient than other instruments for public policy, or you don't believe it?
You know what? I think it is basically an empirical question. I'm an economist by training, so I do a lot of empirical research. So I believe in empirical approaches, like good research. And it's always a question, how good is the cost effectiveness? Yes. And if in some cases you might need a good law to stop climate change, for instance. Nudges might not be the best way to go because they're too soft. But in other policy fields, nudges might be exactly the right thing to do. They're usually not that expensive. They often, when they're done well, they are effective. So the cost effectiveness is something that it's a very important criteria to look for. So I would always see, it's not believing or not believing, but a good politics would be to do good evaluations or ex-ante tests or randomized controlled trials. Test out, is that effective? How much does it cost? Also include, is it ethical? Do people like it? Do they accept it? Does it have unintended side effects, like distributional effects? That's something you wouldn't want to have, or boomerang effects, or rebound effects. And then kind of really go through and compare it to taxes, to regulatory approaches, or educational approaches. And this is done. This is actually being done.
And how? Your empirical research?
It depends. It depends on on the one hand side, the nice thing, but also the difficult thing is that it really depends. It's a case-by-case thing. Because it depends on the culture where you apply it. It depends on your target group, like men are different than women. Kids might act differently to older people, so the target group is important. And it really depends. So it's really maybe the second interesting or different thing of behavioral public policy is the tools, the nudges. The second thing is that it's a whole different policy approach. It's an empirical approach. It's like you test a policy, you learn from the results, then you adapt it in a feedback process, and then you share the results. So it's also something that actually governments or municipalities have to learn. So there's some training is needed. As with mainstream economics, you have to know, kind of, how to work with the models, and what does that tell me if the curve kind of adapts. It's also something to learn and to educate people. So I think it's very, very important also to educate public administrators, but also students at your university in this behavioral approach to policy, because it comes with a new process. You have to know what to do and how to do these empirical investigations, how to evaluate, to ask what is good evidence? How good does the evidence have to be in order for me to follow up with actually real policies? So these are all questions that have to be actually answered more or less on spot and based on empirical research.
But my doubt is, don't you think it is a new alternative to public policy? It is not, because I see in your answers some kind of say, well, it depends, but you are betting for this kind of alternatives.
I do. What I see is the big advantage is that it's kind of a third way, if you want. Because like traditionally, let's take consumer policy. Most of the policies are actually information. Educate the consumer, give the consumer information, give them, about healthy food, give them a traffic light system, and then they know what to do. Fact is, that's not how we are. Those policies are made for fully rational people, but empirically we are humans. We have biases, we use heuristics, we have limited self-regulation. We do not follow up our preferences. We're not a homo economicus. So my plea is to use those behaviorally informed and improved policies to better target the real people. So a tax can be completely wrong. It can go completely wrong because it doesn't really help you reach the political goals that are out there. The new thing about it is that several new things. One thing is indeed that the view of the human being is a different one. It's a more realistic one. It's an empirical one. Yes, people do not always do what they say they will do. People even don't always know what their preferences are. What are their preferences? Is that what they say they want?
Yes, it's very rigid.
Is it what they do?
Rational choice was very rigid.
Exactly.
We were like robots.
Exactly. And that is simply not how people are. And I do believe that this behaviorally improved policies are more effective, basically. But then I say it's always an empirical question. We have to, in the end, you really have to prove that
I want to ask you about the common sense, but we have to make a break and then we come back with this.
Good.
Volvemos. Estamos platicando con Lucia Reisch sobre un tema muy interesante porque el Premio Nobel de Economía Thaler y uno de los grandes constitucionalistas y filósofos políticos norteamericanos, Cass Sunstein, han llamado en un libro pequeños empujones. Por eso el concepto que en inglés ellos usan de nudge. Es un concepto para hablar de una serie de problemas de los que ya Lucía nos ha estado comentando, de las cosas que, por ejemplo, el de no poner un tipo de producto en un lugar o el de poner productos sanos en un supermercado, el de alguna manera las cosas que nosotros muchas veces no conscientemente hacemos y que están en nuestra vida práctica. No sé si eso es correcto, ya le voy a preguntar, pero es de lo que vamos a hablar, estamos hablando y vamos a seguir hablando ahora incluso cómo se convierte esto en política pública. So, Lucia, you make an introduction about this kind of this notch, and I want to know the relevance of this approach to public policy. And also, you can make a parallel with problems of, everyday life, everyday practice is related with this kind of nudge and this kind of things. This, you said something which is very important. We are not people perfectly rational. We can't. We are limited.
Yes.
We don't have enough information. We have some experience we had from our parents. We have many things that make us to approach to our life in some way. Sometimes we are not very conscious what we have learned about many things, but we apply it every day. And all this is related with nudge, or I am wrong?
No, definitely it is. So is the idea of nudge is really making policies for people as they are, and what they know, how they decide. So it's a lot the whole how people make decisions is empirically very different from the textbooks of Homo economicus. And the interesting thing is that some people might say, well, we know that that people are not models, not fully rational models. But the interesting thing is that even in those decisions where people really would like to be rational decision makers, we're simply not. That's simply not how we are. We have very limited self-control. We are very limited in really living up to reaching our goals because there's so many other things that come in between. We are not 24 hours rational information processors. De facto, we are very limited in our information processing skills. There's a famous article back from the 1950s, which is called The Magical Number 7 ± 2. And it basically means that we can only kind of process about 7 information bits per situation. And if you're very educated, that can be increased a little bit, but not to the infinite. So we have other things to do. We are under time pressure. When we're in a supermarket situation, we know that it's about 4 seconds that we actually take for a choice in the supermarket, which is not a lot, which again means that those visual cues have a very important role to play. So just taking the real world decision-making setting into account is something comparatively new when you use that in decision-making. Marketing has known that for a long time. So the marketing people know a lot about things, how to change behaviors, how to understand how we actually tick, how our brain works. And some of this knowledge is very useful also to use for the sake of the welfare of the people by politicians. And I think this is pretty much at the heart of this.
When you say how brain works, that is very important. And that's what Sustain and Tyler says. You talk, some examples of their book are examples that are things that you learn, not learn in a very rational way, but some things that are learned. For example, the examples of I read a red light, but inside the light there is a word that says blue. So it's red, but it's blue. It makes me
doesn't fit together at all.
Yes, it's dissonance. There are a dissonance.
Yes.
So this is something. These are things in this example that I recall. There are examples of some things that I have learned that I don't rationalize. That I don't rationalize easy the way they say. If I see that, I don't know how to behave.
Exactly. So in many situations we just react.
Exactly.
So it's actually Daniel Kahneman, the great Daniel Kahneman, also a Nobel laureate for psychology, who introduced this idea, which is again only a model between System 1 and System 2. So he wrote this beautiful book on thinking fast and slow, and that comprises a lot of cognitive psychology research. But basically what he says, and what a lot of psychologists say, is that there's always these two systems that are kind of on. So system one is it's fast, it's intuitive, it's emotional. We act directly because it's something that it is also deeply wired in our, like from evolutionary theory, we have developed over not just centuries, but probably millions of years. So these are things that we react to immediately, like colors or visuals like faces, baby faces. And then there's system two, and that is the slow, deliberative thinking going on, kind of comparing prices. And interestingly, those two systems also physically work in different parts of our brain. So the cognitive thinking really takes part in the prefrontal cortex, and a lot of neuroscientists they know pretty well what's going on in the brain when we make decisions. So this has been sustained, and it makes a lot of sense also for whether you're a policymaker, if you're a professor, whoever you are, if you want to convince people and want to change behavior, it makes a lot of sense to acknowledge that people are not only system two, they're not only deliberative and slow thinkers, but they also very much depend on the system one. And
because you need it also.
You need it. It's not bad or good, not at all, but it's both systems, and it makes a lot of sense to target both systems.
Okay, well, and what about public policy?
Yes.
And experience. You just published a book recently.
Yes.
And you compare to different, you apply a survey throughout different countries, and you apply it to, and as far as I understand, most of this is very relevant for public policy.
That's what we think. So this specific book is authored with Cass Sunstein, and we have been doing a project together over several years. We asked a very simple question, which is, do people like nudges? Because often we hear from the media, some governments, some political parties, people don't like that. They like either hard law or taxes or information, but nothing in between, because it's manipulative and it's a little bit fuzzy. So we said it's an empirical question. Let's ask the people. So we covered almost 20 countries worldwide with representative surveys, including Mexico, also with the friendly help of UNAM, and found out that we asked nudges that covered mostly environmental and health and safety aims, so more like the positive aims, that most of the people in most countries are actually pretty much pro nudges. Also Mexico, there's different clusters of approval. Mexico is a high approval country, very much like Germany, by the way, very similar, which I found interesting. So there is a basic understanding that if the aims are good, if this is something that we endorse, why not use them? And this is I think it makes sense for policymakers to know that people are not against it. Not basically. There can be bad nudges, of course. There can be the nudges that go against the will of the people. There can be nudges that do not work, nudges that fail. But that can happen also with other policy tools. There's bad laws, there's bad taxes that don't work. So again, it's an empirical question. And these days, like in the past maybe 5 years, this idea of using the psychological insights into how people actually really tick also into policy making, that has been a huge success. And today the OECD has a beautiful map, worldwide map, and about 200 governments are actually using these insights and have either little nudge units or have smart people in the government who are aware of that type of policy making and use it as an additional tool. We're not propagating that
is the only one, or
is the only one.
Alternative to other?
Not at all. It should be. It's an additional valuable tool. Make sure it's done well. Make sure it's done transparently. It's done with the approval of the people, and it's done for the wealth and the health and the safety of the people, and then we're fine.
Unfortunately, we have not too much time. We have finished our program. I thank you very much.
I thank you
for being with us here in UNAM, in TV UNAM,
Yes.
Thank you for being here with us. Muchísimas gracias. Pues es una pequeña muestra de un tema que está en muchos sentidos siendo muy atractivo para la toma de decisiones y para la política pública. Como ya lo mencionó Lucía, particularmente de cosas de medio ambiente, temas de salud, problemas de obesidad, problemas de diabetes, etcétera, para estimular una buena alimentación, para promover en la gente prácticas amigables, en fin, para incluso los temas de seguridad. Han sido experiencias que de alguna manera suenan interesantes, llaman la atención. Y como también dijo Lucía, no se trata de una nueva alternativa de la política pública. Así es que, bueno, pues así lo dejamos y nos vemos la próxima semana. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.